Team Gung
You're going to take it out?
talked away.
All right, you're live, Jimmy.
Hi, welcome back. Wow, I'm very excited for our next guest, James Corbett, award-winning investigative journalist, and since 2007 hosts the Corbett Report, an independent, listener-supported alternative news source covering breaking news and important issues from 9/11 truth and false flag terror to the police state, eugenics, geopolitics, central banking fraud, and more. His new book. Here's his new book. Now, if you're like me, you'll say it's reportage. That's how I would read, but it's reportage. Yeah. So, Misha, you thought it was reportage? Yeah,
She's been studying French.
I thought it was reportage, but James has an English degree, so he calls it reportage. But there's no accent or nothing. You're just supposed to know that. How are you supposed to know that? But there it is. It's right there. It's available. He started writing it about 15 years ago, and boom, next thing you know, he's got a book. Look at that. Just overnight. Hi, James. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, and you should know me by now. I mean, come on, I'm a hoity-toity Canadian. Of course it's going to be reportage.
So, I started reading this book yesterday, and I got about 80 pages in or so, and I feel like I've learned more in those 80 pages than I've learned in 10 years doing my own show. This is amazing. It's an amazing book. It's really you're a great writer, but you're meticulously sourced also, which is important to people like you. It's not important to people like me, and so if you're into that kind of sourcing, which I found out reading the book that there are people who like to just look at the sources first. I had no idea there were those kind of geeks in the world, but people who look at the sources first and then decide if they're going to read the book. So if you're one of those, this is the book for you too. So there's a million things. I have it, my first 80 pages, I have a million bookmarks in it already. I have it already all highlighted all over the place. And there's so many good parts about the book, but not only like, oh my God, I didn't know that about 9/11. Oh, I didn't know. But also, you talk about how they divide us, but we'll get into that in a second. The first thing I guess I wanted to ask you about was, you say in the preface, you say free humanity is still battling the same gang of greedy globalists, egocentric eugenicists, and power-mad plutocrats. Who are the egocentric eugenicists?
Well, as you will find out further on in the book, I do have a couple of essays that swirl around that subject of eugenics. But yeah, there are people who are obsessed with an ideology that goes back identifiably to the late 19th century, where the gentleman scientists of the English gentry came up with this wonderful idea that the gentleman scientists of the English gentry were better human beings than you and me and all the riffraff out there, and they deserve to rule over you. And that is the concept of eugenics. And basically, I mean, at the time when Francis Galton was coming up with the term eugenics and starting along that path, they didn't even know the mechanism of genetic transfer of genes from one generation to another. They didn't really understand any of that. It wasn't science, it was pseudoscience. But at base, it was just a justification for oligarchical rule. There is always some sort of justification that is given to every generation of human beings going back to the beginning of civilization as to why certain people have the right to rule over you. And back in the day, it was the pharaoh was literally the god on earth, or the Japanese emperor was literally descended from the sun god and all of that kind of stuff. Or in the enlightened, European Middle Ages, it was, no, God has appointed this family to rule over you. But 19th century, people are starting to wake up to that. Maybe, I don't know if I'm going to go along with that. So they came up with the scientific or pseudoscientific gibberish reason for that. No, there's some sort of protoplasm that makes us fit to rule over you. And that was the rock star super science of the late 19th, early 20th century. Everyone who was anyone believed in eugenics. And it was just such an obvious thing. Well, Teddy Roosevelt and everyone else was trumpeting it precisely because it gave them the justification for why they get to rule over you and they get to decide who passes their genes on to the next generation. They started all the eugenic sterilization laws and other such things that, oh, wow, wouldn't you know it, got transported overseas and suddenly taken up by the Germans. But it didn't start in Nazi Germany. It started in England, and it was transported to America, where it was really developed by the Rockefellers and many other oligarchical inclined figures. Those are the eugenics-obsessed tyrants who presume to rule over people. And I think that strain, that idea still persists to this day. It just takes a different flavor in the 21st century.
Well, it's funny how they used, wasn't there a descendant of Thoreau or that used, or Darwin, that tried to say that the reason why the offspring of rich, educated people were also rich and educated were because of their genes, not because of the fact that they were born into a rich family and were given great educations, right? Am I correct about that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, yeah, it's not just a descendant of Darwin, it's many descendants of Darwin, because when you look through the ranks of the British Eugenics Society, they were populated for generations, probably to this day, by people who were in some way or another related to Darwin, many of them bearing Darwin's name. But the funny thing is, as I point out in the book, in one of the chapters there, in one of the essays, Darwin himself was concerned about his own family's inbreeding, because the Darwin line, people may not know about this in this day and age, but the Darwin-Galton-Wedgwood line was infamous for marrying in, I mean, it wasn't so much a family tree that branched out so much as branched in. And Darwin himself married his third cousin, but they were both products of a cousin marriage and things like along those lines, to the point where Darwin himself was so concerned about the problem that could result from all of these cousin marriages that were going on in his family that he tried in the late 19th century to get the British Parliament to pass a question that they would put into the census about inbreeding, essentially, so that they could gather more data about this. Because he was concerned, because I believe, off the top of my head, I believe it was 3 of his children died in infancy, and many, many, many of the members of the Darwin-Galton-Wedgwood line were unable to have children or to have children that would survive to adulthood. And he was concerned about this. So the funny thing is, yes, of course, they say, oh, well, you know, the greatest minds breeding with the greatest minds will make these supermen, but actually it makes these deformed, decrepit monsters. And that, in fact, is one of the lessons of history, because as it turns out, a lot of course, royal families have been obsessed with inbreeding because they've got to keep it within the family, right? And as it turns out, the Spanish Habsburgs, for example, bred themselves out of existence. There were so many cousin marriages and brother-sister marriages and all sorts of craziness going on that eventually they became so deformed that they were literally unable to reproduce. That's what you get when you really start practicing eugenics. But for some reason, you know, they don't like to dwell on that fact.
You know, you also say in your book, I'm a voluntarist who believes that the way to improve our world is not by casting a vote for yet another would-be political ruler, but by investing our time, energy, attention, and resources in building our own independent communities from the bottom up. What is that? What can you expand on that a little bit? What does that look like, and what does it mean to an individual?
So fundamentally, I mean, I guess the real questions that you have to ask people when they're talking about political philosophy is what are you fundamentally opposed to? But even more importantly, what are you fundamentally promoting? What do you want to have happen? And perhaps you go from one of those to the other. For example, if I am fundamentally opposed to the oligarchical authoritarian systems that clearly we've been living under for a very long time, and I think still to this day, it's not conspiracy theory to talk about, I've heard you say it many times, you are exactly right. We do not live under political parties. There are oligarchs. That is who rules right now, and I couldn't agree more. So the question is, if that is what I am opposed to, and I think that's the wrong way to go, what is the right way to go? And we have to think about this, well, if not hopefully intelligently, but also strategically. So, for example, in my essay on how to really defeat globalism, I point out that people get caught into the false binaries and sort of traps in thinking that are laid out for them. One of which is, okay, I'm against this big global government idea of taking all of this power and centralizing it in some far off body that I have no control over. So what we need then is, what's opposed to globalism? Nationalism. There you go. That's the answer, right? Well, no, I think we have to think more deeply about it, because the exact same idea that is at the base of nationalism is the idea that they then use to transfer your saluting the flag, your national flag, over to now I'm saluting the UN flag. That is a process that takes generations of indoctrination, but that is exactly what I think has been, the public has been steered towards. So we have to start thinking about, what does it mean to actually oppose centralized oligarchic authoritarian power? What is the opposite of that? It isn't just a different form of oligarchy. No, okay, instead of the global government, we need a national government. No, we have to start thinking about, how do we organize from the bottom up? What does that actually even mean? How does that work? And that's when we start running into people's mental roadblocks. So that's a good reason to use the word voluntarist, because the word anarchist, oh my God, you're a bomb throwing crazy. Oh my God, no, we can't have that. So voluntarist sounds a little bit more intriguing to people. What does that mean? I believe in voluntary human interaction. You know, the basic things that we learn in kindergarten about how you don't hit other people, you don't force them to do something they don't want to do, you don't steal their stuff. How about if we just applied that, I don't know, generally to all human interaction? No matter what badge or hat or, you know, robe you're wearing, you are still just a human being who's privy to the exact same rules as everyone else. What would such a system actually look like? And I know the mind boggles at this, because we have been, all of us have grown up in this statist indoctrination that we must have the law and order of the state to come in and tell everyone what to do. But I think there are other ways of imagining that. And so, for example, in my essay on spontaneous order, a brief introduction to spontaneous order, I talk about the idea that is opposed to that. Instead of having top-down, centralized, authoritarian systems that tell everyone what to do and how to do it, which inevitably causes us all to fight for that ring of power, because who's ever sitting in that seat of power suddenly has control over the entire society, so it better be our man, and so we start fighting with each other. If there is no such seat of power, we have to learn how to negotiate, cooperate, and agree to disagree with the people around us as actual human beings. And there are ways to do that, and there are people who have thought about these types of systems in the past. I'm just trying to at least get people to imagine what such a world would look like, because, as I say, I think if you're opposed to authoritarian oligarchical systems, you have to at least understand what it is you were opposed and what the other side of that looks like.
And so what does that look like? You know, what does it mean when, from instead of the top down, bottom up? What does it mean for an individual?
So for an individual, as I say, I think it goes back to the basic kindergarten level ethics that we all learn and understand, which just means that nobody has any special right to do anything that nobody else has the right to do. There's no magical incantation, no spell, no magical, 50% plus one of the populace voted for this thing, so now it's going to happen. No, we have to learn to negotiate. And so when you start bringing up these ideas, people will have their pre-planted objections, the most interesting and the most vociferous of which is, but what about the roads? I don't know, for some reason, every time you bring up this idea, it's like, how will roads be built in such a society if there is no government to make them? Well, it's funny because the answer is, they will be built by the exact same people as they are in our system. It's just instead of having some sort of government middleman to hire contractors to literally pave the roads, well, the community will decide, hey, we need a road, let's chip in and make a road. And those who don't want to do not have to. And this is the real question. This is where things get really philosophically important, because essentially we could have the exact same system as we do now if we wanted to. But the only difference in a voluntary society is, well, it would have to be voluntary participation. And you could say, nah, I'm good. No, count me out. I don't want that. That's not me. And that is essentially the mental roadblock for a lot of people. A lot of people can't imagine such a society. No, we must have guys with badges and hats and guns who can come to your door and extort you and throw you in prison and kill you if you resist, if you don't do what we say. And how could we imagine running society in any other way? I think there are other ways to do that. So
you, in the book, it's really a book that warms my heart in many ways. But one of them is that, I've said on this show a million times that this left-right divide that the whole world is put into is phony. And you really elucidate why that's a phony game. And you use the terms upists and downists. And the upists are the people, the elite, the handful, what I call them, the handful of billionaires that actually control things, the WEF, the Bilderbergs, the people like that. And then there's everybody else. And, I like how you, and there really is a cabal or a society of the haves, the upists, as you refer to them in your book, that really do want to control everything. And they've been doing it for a long, long time. And let me just read a bit from your book. On page 31, you say, you actually quote Carol Quigley, who Bill Clinton actually quoted. And she says, the argument that two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea, acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can, quote, throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. And that's exactly the world we live in. And that's like been the raison d'etre of this show, is to make people realize that meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? And that neither of them are going to give you affordable health care. Neither of them are going to make sure that you're taken care of, the workers are taken care of. Instead, they're both in bed with the corporations. They're both in bed with the military. Trump's ending a war in Ukraine, and he's trying to start another one in Yemen and Iran, which could be easily World War III because Iran is aligned with Russia. And so George Carlin had talked about, we have the illusion of choice. And that's exactly what Carol Quigley was saying. We have to have two parties to give people the illusion of choice. And every 4 years they get to throw the bums out, but we just replace them with the same bums that are controlled by the same people. Right now, Bernie Sanders and AOC are doing a nationwide tour, and all of a sudden, they're fighting the oligarchs. Now, they weren't fighting the oligarchs for the last 4 years, even though more billionaires, almost twice as many billionaires backed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as backed Donald Trump. So they weren't fighting those oligarchs, right? And here it is, right? So there they are. Bernie tweets this out. Oh, look, Trump. So it's called Fight the Oligarchy. They're on a Fight the Oligarchy, and they're bragging about how much more popular they are than Trump was, even though they're lying about the seats and they're lying all the way through it. And Brianna Joy Gray, who used to be Bernie Sanders' press secretary, tweeted this out, retweeted Bernie Sanders' tweet. And she says, this is going to seem sinister when they tell these people to vote for oligarchs in 2028, just like they did in 2020 and just like they did in 2024. And so that's so in fact, let me just show you here how this woman, I think, used to be a Democrat, and she kind of exposes this lie on Fox. Let's listen to it.
There is such an irony to Democrats talking about oligarchy because, of course, for every one billionaire that backed President Trump, Kamala Harris had 2. 9 of the 10 richest counties in America are represented by Democrats. 65% of Americans making over $500,000 a year today are Democrats. 75% of hedge fund managers who make political donations donate to Democrats, and 95% of political donations from the top 3 management consulting firms go to Democrats. Meanwhile, President Trump absolutely crushed with Americans who make under $100,000 a year. The Democrats are the party of the wealthy. And Donald Trump is representing the working class because he simply lifted the pro-worker elements of the Democrats' agenda when they abandoned the working class to cater to their rich base. This is all performance art. And what's so upsetting about it is they are being paid by the American people to serve them, and they are doing nothing of the kind.
So she's got a lot right there, and she gets a lot wrong. And the wrong part was she said that Donald Trump he picked up lip service. He picked up the words, the verbiage that the Democrats used to use. But of course, he's not doing that, right? Of course, he's there to give a tax cut to millionaires and billionaires. He's there to make sure the military-industrial complex gets their cut, Wall Street gets their cut. And, whatever happened to no tax on tipped wages, whatever happened to no tax, like that's not the first thing they're doing at all. And of course, they're not cutting the Pentagon. And this isn't a new game. So she's right about that. The Democrats are now the party of the rich, and it's flipped to where workers are voting for Donald Trump, not because Donald Trump has done anything to actually look out for them, but because they've got nowhere else to go. And Donald Trump actually offers them rhetorically an alternative to the Democrats, but he doesn't in substance offer them an alternative to the Democrats. And that's what you talk about in this book, right?
Essentially, yes. And I think you're right. She got a lot right there, including it's all performance art. I'll just extend that, to both sides of the bird of prey. Both wings of the bird of prey are attached to the same bird of prey, and they are preying on you. And just as an example of that, I mean, for example, hey, we're taking back the Panama Canal, America first, yay, yay, yay.
Who did they give it to?
Yeah, who was behind that deal? Who got on the phone with Trump in his first days in office to say, hey, guys, let's do this. Let's cut a deal here. Oh, Larry Fink, BlackRock. Yay. Yay, BlackRock took over the Panama Canal.
So we didn't take it over. Better. We didn't take it. The United States, the people, the workers, they gave it to BlackRock.
Yep.
As if they need
America first.
Yeah, because they need more power.
Right. So it is performance art. It's like professional wrestling, or I liken it to the Matrix. You'll remember back in the Matrix, they said that the first iteration of the Matrix was one where you got anything you wanted anytime. The robots made people believe that they were, living in this wonderful utopian. You could get anything you wanted. People would pull themselves out of that Matrix because they couldn't believe it. They had to make it more and more realistic so people would want to stay in. Put some hardships in there, put some things, put some struggles, so that you could finally get a system where people will want to stay in the Matrix. I think that is essentially the governing systems that have been going throughout history. And you've had all these different types of government systems that have come along, but democracy, the wonderful, hey, you get to put your vote in the slave suggestion box once every few years. That's your power, and that's the thing that you can do to change the world, and blah blah blah. And they give that to you so that you not only stay in the system but stay invested in the system. And unfortunately, what is the result of that? As I say, the stakes keep rising and rising as more and more power accrues in the hands of this executive presidency, to the point where it's a life and death matter. We have to have that seat of power, and we will do anything to get it. And suddenly, half of the population becomes your mortal enemy. It's those people. It's my neighbor is the reason my life sucks. It has nothing to do with the people at the top. It's the people around me, and we got to fight them. That is the system that they've gotten us into. And so when I'm talking about up-down politics, believe it or not, I'm sure this will surprise you. I was a bit of a science nerd when I was growing up. And I remember, when I first started to think about multi-dimensional physics, like what does it mean to have more than 3 spatial dimensions? And they're talking about tesseracts and hypercubes and all this stuff. But one simple explanation comes from, for example, Carl Sagan presented this, talking about flatland and the idea of these people who live in a totally, completely 2-dimensional space. And you have these like squares moving around as Sagan was demonstrating on his desk, and they could interact with each other, but they had no concept of this up and down dimension. And suddenly something comes from the upper dimension into their world, And they can only perceive it in their two-dimensional way, and it can move around in ways that they can't comprehend because there is no up and down. There's only left and right. So what on earth? How did this thing appear? Suddenly, when you go to 3 dimensions, it's like, oh, I see what's happening. I understand what's happening. This object came down into flatland from the 3rd dimension. Well, in the same way, politics, the only thing we ever talk about now is left and right, and I guess center, but it's a line. All of the political universe is a straight line, and that's the only thing that we can talk about and the only way we can perceive it. And so suddenly when things start moving around in ways that we don't understand, and hey, that guy said he was on our side, but suddenly he's on the other side, and all of this stuff, what's going on? We need another dimension in order to understand what's happening. So if we add the up and down dimension, suddenly we start to understand the political world in a way that makes sense. Oh, I get it. There's authoritarians who want more centralized oligarchical power, and that means there must be a down direction. People who don't want that, people who want more power decentralized down to the local level, down to the individual. So there's suddenly a different dimension that's operating here, and we can better understand that our mortal enemies who are oppressing us are not your neighbor who voted the wrong way. It's the people at the top who are trying to control you. Look up. That's where we should be directing our power.
Well, I've said this, you got it exactly right. And I've said it several different ways, which is why I have my audience is made up of people on what's considered the left and what's considered the right. And they're just divided that way, kind of in a phony way, because they all have the same common interest. So that's the thing that the upists, the oligarchs, don't want people to realize, that they actually have more in common with their neighbors than they do with the ruling people of their own political party or persuasion. That I have more in common with a MAGA person than I do with Bill Gates or John Kerry or Bill Clinton or the Obamas, right? And that's the thing. And so they want you to hate your neighbor and blame your neighbor for the pain you're feeling. And most recently, they wanted the Democrats wanted you to hate the Republicans for the pain you're feeling during COVID because they wouldn't take a vaccine, and that didn't work the way they said it did in the first place, right? So this is all by design, right? So, and I've often told people, if you find yourself angry at someone lower on the economic ladder than you, it's a good chance you're being manipulated by someone higher on the economic ladder than you, which is the game they play with immigration. But this doesn't come out of nowhere, right? This goes back hundreds of years, if not longer. And you talk about the Bilderbergs, and people don't know about the Bilderbergs. Now, it used to be some crazy thing that Alex Jones made up. But now, thanks to the reporting of people like you, people like the Gray Zone, we all know it's real. Now, can you just tell people what the Bilderbergs are? And even though influential news people have been invited to meetings of the Bilderbergs, they would never report on it, which is amazing. So could you just go ahead and take it wherever you want? And how would you explain it to a layperson, a regular person who doesn't know anything about the Bilderbergs, what they are, how they started, and how they actually control everything?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good question. And so, yes, in Reportage, I have an essay specifically on why we must oppose Bilderberg, which I think my regular audience and people who listen to me will probably understand by now. But you're right. There's a lot of people who have never heard of Bilderberg, have no idea what it is. So let's just imagine if you had, 100 of the top sports athletes or movie stars or whatever gathering in an enclave in LA there for a few days every year. You better believe every paparazzi in existence would be swarming over that place. They'd be reporting on it breathlessly. Oh my God, what are they talking about in there? Oh my God, the movie moguls are going to make some incredible new Marvel movie, whatever. People try to understand about that. They'll report on it. But suddenly when you have, say, 150 corporate chieftains, captains of industry, financiers and bankers, sitting members of parliament, sitting members of Congress, cabinet members, royalty, and Rockefellers and Kissingers back when they were alive, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and people like that. Now that we've switched into the 21st century, suddenly whatever, crickets, who cares? Whatever, move on. It's crazy that you're even interested in that. And as crazy as that is, 20 years ago, it literally was. They told you it was a conspiracy theory that Bilderberg even existed. That to me is just mind blowing. So yes, for people who don't know, every year since 1954, with the exception of the scamdemic, I think they canceled it for a year or two. But basically every year since 1954, these incredibly important 150, 200 of the most important people in the world have been meeting entirely in secret in some 4-star resort near some national capital, either in Europe or North America, once a year for three days. And they get together and they discuss, well, what do they discuss? Thankfully, we do have some insight into this, and I've got the links from the notes here in case, as you say, people might actually be interested in it. You can go and read some of the meeting minutes, and even some audio has leaked out of some of these meetings, but they are completely, totally off limits to press to anyone, unless, you know, except for those reporters who actually go there and actually participate in Bilderberg. But they have that Chatham House rule where you can go there and you can listen and you can even say some of the things that were talked about there, but you cannot identify who said what or any specifics. That's the rule that they operate under.
So,
Yeah,
well, let me just, you know, it comes even under a bigger umbrella if that's possible. You say on page 32, in other words, there is a clandestine network of influential figures, the roundtable groups referred to by Quigley, who cooperate with both the left and the right sides of the traditional political spectrum to carry out their own self-serving agenda. In this way, they rig the system so that voters can never affect fundamental change. And that's what's actually happening at the Bilderberg meeting. Now people are more familiar with the WEF and Davos and things like those are similar things, and that is there to make sure that your vote doesn't matter. I think Mark Twain said if voting made a difference, they'd make it illegal, right?
I think it's attributed to Emma Goldman.
Okay,
I don't know
maybe
if
you're
either
right.
of those attributions are right. But anyway, yeah, you're right. And look, I don't think Bilderberg is the center of global power. It is the conspiracy, but it is certainly one of the arms through which this operates. And we can get that from a number of perspectives. For example, Willy Claes, who was the NATO Secretary General once upon a time and attended Bilderberg twice, admitted in a radio interview that essentially meetings take place, they discuss certain topics, and then every individual member of Bilderberg is expected to go back and implement whatever decisions are made in their own way. He said that in a radio interview. So we know that this does happen. And we know, for example, that the euro was talked about, discussed, and hashed out at Bilderberg before it was ever actually put into reality. And again, we have that from Etienne d'Avignon himself. So these people have talked about it at times and sort of given a little peek under the kimono, but we're not supposed to care about that at our level, I guess. Just keep eating nachos and watching Super Bowl or something.
So, so you talk about like the round table groups, right? Which is what Quigley had referred to. And let me just read this part. The actual aim of these kind of networks, right, of Bilderbergs, the WEF, and so on. She says the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. We're living in this right now, by the way. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements, something most people have never heard of. In Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned by and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. So now the bigger picture is, and we're actually living in this. So I try to tell people, well, Jimmy, are these secret meetings where people get together to do the bidding of the oligarchs? And I'm like, no, one of those meetings would be called a session of Congress. When they get together, you think they're really doing the bidding of workers and the elderly and the sick and the poor? They're doing the biddings of the oligarchs, these people, the people on these round tables, the Bilderbergs, the people at the WF, the handful of millionaires and billionaires that actually run everything in the world. And it's run for them. And, there was a study by Princeton done about 10 years ago now that proved that your vote doesn't matter, that there is no correlation between what the average voter wants to see in legislation and what actually ends up in legislation. But there is a direct correlation between the upper 10% in the country of what they want to see, and if they want to see it, it ends up in legislation. And so this is what people, and it's a big game, this left-right game, and this whole world domination. If you could just talk a little bit about, you mentioned it earlier about the euro, how they got together, and their dream was the European Union, right? So talk a little bit about, well, let me just play this video and then you can respond to it. Here's a guy who's going to let you know that the European Union is basically a scam.
Here's one for you. The EU is the world's biggest scam, and its leaders are nothing but flunky politicians running cover for each other. You ever notice how scandal-ridden politicians never actually fall? Instead of getting fired, persecuted, or held accountable, they magically land cushy jobs in the EU. Take Ursula von der Leyen. She was Germany's Minister of Defense, a total disaster. Her ministry handed out millions in shady contracts to friends and ex-colleagues in a scandal so bad it should have ended her career. Fraud, mismanagement, backroom deals, the works. And what happened? She got promoted, not fired, not investigated, promoted to President of the European Commission, one of the most powerful positions in Europe. That's the EU's real purpose, protecting its own. This is why the EU is a joke. It's a dumping ground for politicians who should be in court, not in power. They don't answer to voters, they answer to each other. And now the same fraud is pushing Europe into war. You think someone who was pulling dirty defense contracts in Germany suddenly got honest in Brussels? If she was handing out shady deals then, what the hell do you think she's doing now? This is why Hungary, Slovakia, and others aren't playing along. They see through the scam. They're not about to send their soldiers to die for von der Leyen's career, for Brussels' power grab, or for the war machine cashing in on billions. This isn't just another corruption scandal. This isn't about stolen tax money. This is about setting up Europeans to kill and die in a war they didn't sign up for. And who benefits? Not the average European struggling with inflation, not the people crushed by energy prices, not the Ukrainians thrown into the grinder. The only winners are the unelected frauds in Brussels and the war profiteers counting their money. It's a total scam. It's always been a scam, and the longer people refuse to see it, the more lives will be destroyed.
Now, you explain very clearly in this book, which is a wonderful book. I can't talk. I'll be recommending it to everyone and buying it for anybody who still reads books. But you lay out in clear detail how the European Union was conceived and then implemented. In fact, there was a handful of countries in Europe didn't want to go along with them, Ireland being one of them. And when they voted it down, they made them keep. Go ahead. You talk about how it got started.
Yeah, no, it's a crazy story, and I wish more people knew about it. So, yes, to put it on the record, from 1955, the second ever Bilderberg Conference. We have the meeting minutes from that conference now. They are available online, and they talk specifically there at the second ever Bilderberg Conference about arriving in the shortest possible time at the highest degree of integration, beginning with a common European market. They were aiming at trying to form a European Union. 2 years later, 1957, they signed the Treaty of Rome, which established the European Economic Community. And they sort of passed it off like, oh, this is just kind of a little trade agreement. It's just a little, it's not important, guys. Don't worry about it. But then fast forward 50 years to 2007, and they're like, hey, it's the 50th anniversary of the European Union. Because do you remember that Treaty of Rome thing? Yeah, that was the start of the European Union. We just didn't tell you guys about it. And who signed the Treaty of Rome? Oh, like Bilderberg members like Paul Henry Spaak. So, they had their snoot all in that from the very beginning. And it is, as that speaker there was talking about, is completely an undemocratic, completely ridiculous institution in so many ways. And the prime example of that was in the early 2000s. They were trying to pass this European constitution. They wanted a constitution for the EU. But the problem was a constitutional document that countries were going to sign up to, that gave a lot of countries, just by the nature of their system, it mandated that they have referendum. And actually gave the people a say in it. So, for example, I believe the Netherlands and France, there were a number of countries that were voting it down. It wasn't going to get passed. So they're like, okay, we're not going to do this constitution thing. We're going to have the Lisbon Treaty. It's basically the constitution in all but name.
A treaty. They called it a treaty instead of a constitution.
Yeah, exactly. And that bypassed every single national government except Ireland. Ireland was the one that had in their own Irish constitution, no, we still get to vote. We still get a referendum. So they had to give the Irish people a say. And the first vote on the Lisbon Treaty, the Irish people said no. So they said, okay, vote again. They just did it all over again.
Yes.
It's completely ridiculous. And then they rigged it 7 ways from Sunday. And finally, the Irish people said yes to the Lisbon Treaty. So that's how it came in. This is the kind of nonsense that they have been pulling for decades and decades and decades. And unfortunately, it flies under the radar for a lot of people. But once you start digging, scratching the surface, you start finding all this stuff. And it isn't crazy conspiracy realist James Corbett sitting here in Japan. Like, what does he know? As you say, Carol Quigley, I should just interject, just like reportage, not reportage. Carol Quigley is in fact a man, and not just any man.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Carol Quigley was a Georgetown professor who was a real deal, like big name historian, and who celebrated, lauded, big career, very important historian, who started writing about some of the inner workings of these roundtable groups and the Anglo-American establishment, Tragedy and Hope, books like that. Suddenly his publisher was destroying the prints of these books and trying to essentially suppress it. He had to give like secretive interviews that did survive, and you can listen to them online, where he's talking about, they're trying to suppress my books and everything. But that's the same Carol Quigley that Bill Clinton name-checked in his acceptance speech for the DNC nomination back in '92. He said Carol Quigley was the man who provided me the vision, blah, blah, blah. So there you go. That's the type of people who are talking about this. If anybody is listening, wake up.
So in your book, you're not kidding when you say that they had plans to form a world system of financial control. And we are living in that now, correct?
More or less, and more by the day. For example, People might know Mark Carney about to take, or has
Oh.
actually taken over PM
Yes.
in Canada. He sat on the Financial Stability Board, which was part of this Bank for International Settlements that were writing the global banking rules in the wake of the 2008 financial collapse. Because suddenly there's this big financial crisis. What are we going to do about it? They have the G20 in London, which you might remember Gordon Brown, the PM of Britain at that time, said, we need a new world order to save the earth. And so, of course, the Bank for International Settlements goes in and starts rewriting global banking regulations. Mark Carney was sitting on the Financial Stability Board that was helping to do that and bringing in the bail-in legislation, not bail out, not bailing out the banks, bailing them in by taking the depositors' funds and using that to recapitalize banks if they go underwater. That's the kind of stuff that we're looking at. And those are the kinds of people, Mark Carney and others, connected in with organizations like this, World Economic Forum and Bilderberg and these types of groups. And
so the European Union, actually, that it exists, marked a victory for what we would call the globalists, right? The Bilderbergs. And you write in your book on page 40, they had achieved once they got the European Union, they had achieved their aim of continental hegemony. So that's what the European Union actually represents, is continental hegemony of the ruling elite. It's not a victory for the people of Europe, correct?
Oh, absolutely not. No. So people need to understand that the idea for global government isn't simply to have some, actual capital of the world in wherever, Brussels or wherever. No, the idea is to put regional governments in place that then cooperate with each other on the big level, but whatever, regional governments first. And that's the system. So exactly like, remember 1984, it was Eurasia and East Asia and Oceania. And as Winston Smith notes in 1984, the bombs are falling and they tell us it's Eurasia or East Asia or whoever. It may be our own government. Who knows? Just bombs fall and we're at war. That's the type of system for global government that we're moving towards. And that's why regionalization and creation of, for example, the European Union is so important. And here's the crazy thing. In one of the essays in this book, I go into the North American Union idea that was really being worked on in earnest in the early 2000s there with the Security and Prosperity Partnership and all of that kind of nonsense, this shared strategic perimeter. And at that time, hey, that was when I was cutting my teeth in this conspiracy realist space back a couple of decades ago. And I remember at that time, you would have all these people crying out against the North American Union, and we don't want this, we don't want the Amero, because they're going to replace the dollar with the Amero and all of this. People were protesting against it. But weirdly, fast forward to 2025, and suddenly Trump is talking about taking over, Canada, 51st state, Greenland, whatever, we'll keep adding it to America. And a lot of the same people who were protesting that are now suddenly on board with the idea of some formation of some sort of grander North American union. That's the kind of craziness that we're stepping into.
And, the book keeps making I want to go back to this point, is that, you say in the book that more people are waking up to this game being played by the globalists, right? By the international elite, the bankers, and the internet had a big role. It helped wake you up, when you got your internet in your apartment, and it certainly is how I learn almost everything, and the game so people are starting to wake up. The people who are, the workers of the world are waking up to this game and how they're being divided. So that's why I have a lot of MAGA viewers on my show. They don't necessarily agree with everything that I say, but they appreciate that I'm honest and I don't see them as the enemy, and they don't see me as the enemy. They realize that we do share a common enemy, and the common enemy, as you refer to in your book, are the uppists or the international bankers and globalists that actually run things. And then you say, on page 44, in short, we the people are realizing that it is the uppists, not each other, not your neighbor, who are our true political enemy. And the uppists realize that we are realizing it too. So they're starting to realize that. And you say, if we could overturn the system overnight, we could overturn the system overnight if enough of us were aware of our true position as downists living in an uppist system. So so you have hope, right? That people are waking up to this left-right paradigm. And let me just show you a perfect, this just came across my Twitter feed last night. This is a perfect example of how they get us to divide each other, workers hating workers, so we cannot come together to oppose them. There's a video of a person walked into a bar in Indianapolis wearing a MAGA hat, and well, here's what happened.
Hey, I have a question.
No, we're not answering
Why?
questions. Get out of the bar.
Why?
Because you're a Trump supporter.
I know, but don't you guys want our money?
No, actually we don't. Get out of my bar right now.
You're not welcome.
I'm not fucking around. Get out of my bar.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. Out.
Because I'm wearing a Trump
Yes.
hat. That's wild.
I don't care. Get out.
We can call the police, or you can just leave.
You know this is like discrimination, right?
Oh, boo-hoo! Boo fucking hoo! Get out of my bar.
So the people who scream the loudest about discrimination are now doing the discrimination because they feel morally righteous in doing so. And that bar, the Chatterbox Bar, actually put this Instagram out. It's the home to a diverse group of staff and patrons, just not half the country. We do not tolerate dehumanizing or disrespectful language or symbolism in our establishment. I guess that bat is not a bad symbol. We have a right by law to refuse service to anyone who disrupts our business. We look forward to continue being a home for people who love music and appreciate our community. So just a few people, the girl with the tattoos and piercings who wants to be accepted for who she is, takes a bat to kick out someone with a hat she does not like. Funny how places like this and her bar have the freedom to refuse service to people who might deviate from their beliefs, yet Christian bakers, photographers, and other businesses get sued and financially destroyed if they politely refuse to bake cakes, take photos, etc. So they've got it. They've got us, right, James? That's an example of the international globalists at the ground level of how it works and how they sit back laughing at us. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely right. And yeah, it's the old conundrum of diversity, except for ideological diversity, right? But yes, divide and rule has been the game plan, the strategy of tyrants and oligarchs for thousands of years. It is no different today. And I keep going back to about a decade and a half ago, because as I say, the 2008 financial crisis and all of the craziness that resulted from that. Do you remember when they were talking about the $700 billion bailout?
Yeah.
It actually became 29 trillion, but whatever, numbers schmumbers, $700 billion. And people marched en masse against that. They were flooding congressmen and senators with phone calls and saying, no, hell no, we won't go along with this. Absolutely not. People were incensed. It brought people together. And I keep going back to the fact that you had two movements that spun out of that. One on the right called the Tea Party and one on the left called Occupy. And they essentially had the same message. It's the 99% versus the 1%. They were against the banks, the bailouts, the oligarchs. But they both got spun off into identity politics, left-right politics, divide and rule politics, and got further and further apart until eventually it ended up in the last decade and a half of identity politics and culture war issues being the only thing, again, the only part of the political universe that we can talk about. And divide and rule, my God, has it ever worked as beautifully as it has in the past decade and a half? It's crazy. And I think that was a deliberate strategy that was implemented, because I think the one thing they truly fear is, oh my God, they're mad at us. They're mad at the bankers and the financiers. We better do something about this. And boy, did they.
And boy, did they. But the good news is that more people are becoming aware from programs like yours, your book, shows like this, of the game that's being played on us. And you say that people are realizing that the upists, the globalists, act not in the interest of the common citizen, but solely in the interest of a tiny, tight-knit network of oligarchs who operate in secret and who control almost the entirety of the world's wealth. With this awareness comes the freeing realization that key cogs in the upist machinery of control can be removed from the system, so that at a certain critical point, the machinery itself will cease to function. So, it gives me hope. I always tell people I have to have hope.
Can I make a distinction here? Because yes, a couple of years ago, I put out a podcast on hopium, which tried to put out the idea there that politicians play on the fact that humans need hope. They need something to strive towards. They need something for the future. So they have replaced real, genuine hope with hopium, this synthetic simulacrum opiate type substance that people can inject into their veins every few years when some new political messiah comes along. Whoever that is, Obama, Trump, whatever. Oh my God, this is going to save the earth. And it never, ever works out, because as we say, those are upists that are playing their upist game and keeping us divided and ruled. But real, genuine hope is a beautiful thing. And I think we need that as human beings to move forward. So the real hope lies in the people, not in politicians doing their politician thing, not in businesses and corporations. Oh, don't worry, they're going to take care of you this time. It comes from each other. And to the extent that we have been divided so that you can't even go into somebody's bar because you're wearing the wrong hat, then we lose. But when we come together en masse, like we did in 2000, 2008, 2009, as that movement was coming together, that is what the upists truly fear. And that is the hope. And I keep going back to this. The people have the power. They always have, always throughout history. All of the oligarchical parasitical power that they, them, those have at the top of this system has been sucked out of the economy of real working people doing the real labor that actually makes everything run. And if we remember that and take that seriously and start removing ourselves from their systems of control and start cooperating with each other and supporting local networks of interest and economies, local businesses, getting as much off of that system as possible, we start withdrawing the power from the oligarchs themselves. We have the power. We always have. We just have to remember that and reclaim it.
And so, you know, one of the things that started to wake me up, and you too, was 9/11. And once you look into it, which they shamed people, just like you weren't supposed to do your own research around COVID, because if you looked into it, you would find out they were lying to you about everything. Everything from who funded the creation of the virus to the fatality rate of the virus to the contraction and transmission to lockdowns to masks. There wasn't to natural immunity and herd immunity. It wasn't a thing they didn't lie. So that's why they had to shame you as hard to not look into COVID, because as soon as you did your own research, you would find out you were being lied to on a scale that your mind almost can't comprehend, and most people's minds can't. And that started with me with Building 7. And I realized that a steel building doesn't fall into its own footprint because a plane hit another building a couple hundred yards away. That doesn't happen. It's never happened before. It's never happened since. It happened 3 times on one day. And there were people who made massive bets. It's called shorting now. They would call them puts back then. So if you think a stock of a business is going to go down, you can make a bet on that, and then you can collect when their stock goes down. And there was people who did that right before 9/11. To companies like United Airlines, American Airlines, stuff like that. Businesses we knew would go down after 9/11. And I just want you to, could you just tell people, who is Mr. and Mrs. Wirt D. Walker III? Just tell people who that is.
So Wirt Walker, as people might be able to guess from that name, yeah, Walker, George Herbert Walker Bush, George Walker Bush. Oh yeah, okay, a distant relation to the Bush family itself. And Wirt Walker III was a business partner with Marvin Bush, who was George W. Bush's brother, in a company called Stratesec, which provided defense and security operations to various airports, including Dulles Airport, as well as various other facilities. And yeah, you better believe in the immediate wake of the 9/11 terror event, the stocks of companies like Stratesec went up. So in fact, yes, as I document in the book, the FBI were investigating as part of the SEC investigation into this informed trading that did take place before 9/11. Not 1, not 2, but 3 different peer-reviewed scientific studies have concluded there was informed trading before 9/11. So what do we make of that? Well, the FBI did their investigations, and they alighted on this couple that were redacted from the actual documents that we got out. But there was a researcher called Kevin Ryan who went through it and unredacted those and found, yes, it was the Walkers who were being questioned about their odd stock movements in the run-up to 9/11. But don't worry, guys. There's no conceivable connection between Wirt Walker or any of these people that were investigated and Al-Qaeda. Therefore, there was no informed trading. Which, you know, you have to think, oh, okay, so that kind of begs the question, right? Because, oh, we know it was Al-Qaeda, and we know who those people are, and we know who those people aren't. Therefore, we know that this they were just incredibly lucky in a way that has never happened before in history, I guess. And it's not even just the put options, because everyone, I think, has at least heard. They were even reporting it on ABC News and other mainstream outlets right after 9/11, the put options on United Airlines and companies like that. It was call options as well, as in you can buy the stock at a low price and then sell it off at the higher price later on. That happened to companies like Raytheon, which, you know, in the immediate wake of 9/11, suddenly you get all the defense contractors making their blood money, of course. So it was absolutely, there was informed trading going on. You have all these individuals that were investigated, but the SEC decides, oh, you know what, we can't, they have no conceivable relation to Al-Qaeda, so whatever. And a few years later,
so that meant, so if they couldn't put together George Bush's distant relative who was a business partner with another Bush, if they could not connect them to Al-Qaeda, they used that to dismiss any suspicion that they somehow had foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks. So if they couldn't connect them to Al-Qaeda, because the Al-Qaeda were the only people who knew about the 9/11 attacks, according to the FBI. So if they couldn't connect them to the Al-Qaeda, that meant they were in the clear. And of course, you didn't have to have a connection. They had a connection to George Bush, Dick Cheney, and the neocons, who now a lot of people suspect had something to do with that.
Exactly right. I mean, again, it begs the question. And to me, the part, so I've read the actual 9/11 Commission report, which I think not a lot of people have. And I remember reading it at the time, 2005, 2006, whenever it came out, I think it was 2005, and thinking, wow, you know, this is the story. Of course, as we learn later, 1/3 of the footnotes in that in that document relate back to torture testimony that was just extracted under torture that would not be permissible in any court, at least any reasonable court, right? And that's exactly why they've been stuck in Guantanamo for decades now, and they can't actually get any verdicts or trials because they were tortured. This was torture testimony. But beyond that, one of the things that always stuck out to me with that report is when they come to the question of the funding. The funding of these hijackers and how did this plot get, and they said the money trail, we haven't quite figured that out, but ultimately it's of little practical significance. And I remember thinking at the time that I read those words, hey, isn't the dictum of any investigation follow the money? Isn't that the whole idea? You really got to go down the money trail, but for some reason, little practical. Don't worry, guys, don't worry your little heads about how all this money was trading around. So that's always stuck with me. And the more I dug into the 9/11 terror trade, the informed trading that did take place before 9/11, the more I started to go, oh yeah, I think there's something here.
So the business partner of George Bush's brother makes these really suspicious trades right before 9/11 that pay off so unbelievably handsomely. And that's just a coinky-dink. That's just a...
So we are expected to believe. And the best part is the SEC ultimately destroyed all of their records of the investigation into this informed trading because, just routine record keeping. Whatever.
Just routine, let's just destroy stuff. Yeah. So, James, it's a great book. I want everybody to check out. Is there a special website you want them to go to get this?
Sure. If they go to reportagebook.com, spelled like it sounds, REPORTAGE book.com, they can get all the details on how to get a copy.
So, I mean, it kicks off, the book kind of kicks off with that information about George Bush's brother's business partner. I mean, and then you had me, right? And it just gets better from there. And so everybody should, if you read books, this is definitely one of the books you should read, and you'll never be the same, and you'll wake up and you won't be a victim of the propaganda anymore. In fact, you'll be able to see it from a mile away, and you won't walk around hating your neighbor or blaming your neighbor anymore, which is what they want. And you'll be a free man. Your mind will be free from the matrix that they have you living in right now. James Corbett, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for all the great work you do. And thanks for making time for our little show here. I really appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing, brother.
You too. And thank you for pointing out the oligarchy, because I see not a lot of people are doing that in independent media. I'm glad you do.
Okay. All right. Let's take a break. We're going to go to Rumble, and we'll see you on the other side at Rumble.
Okay.
Hey, winners don't make resolutions. Resolutions break. Instead, they just start and then maximize that momentum. When the goal is health span or being able to live better for longer, there are a few non-negotiables. One of them is quality. And when it comes to supplements geared toward high performers, no one does it like Momentous. They invest in NSF certification, meaning every batch is tested for heavy metals, harmful additives, and label claim accuracy, and is the reason they're trusted by all 32 NFL teams and collegiate sports teams, dietitians all over the country. Trusting research and their ecosystem of experts over fads means not offering every supplement on the market. Other brands can do that. Momentous believes in nailing the basics with bone-crushing consistency, then curating an intentional routine based on your individual goals. And by basics, we mean protein and creatine. Momentous sources CreaPure, the purest form of creatine monohydrate available. And it's an absolute must for both men and women for peak physical and cognitive performance. Go to livemomentous.com and try it today at 20% off with code Jimmy and start living on purpose.
Okay. Hello. All right. Here we go. Savage. Thank you. Last chat warning, not a promise, like post flood sign. I don't know what that means. Is it Mexican music plays at entrance to his live shows? Are you saying Mexican music? Savage, Jimmy Card is reliably always never on time again. Savage, why are you busting our balls? You know how the show rolls. I'm a coward and I always wait until someone to get immense powers to start criticizing them so they crush me and I can't fight back. Haha, GD and PB. I'm convinced that aspartame is what gave my aunt, a middle-aged Italian woman, bone cancer that usually only found in older black men. Calling it poison is an understatement, and it should be banned. Thank you for that one. Rabiz. Love you, Jimmy. Israel is a terrorist state. And that was from Jim.
Hey, so are we.
Aspartame was being studied as a mind control chemical warfare agent at the Pentagon under Donald Rumsfeld. Then he took it to Big Soda, and it got it greased through FDA approval. Another worldview.
That's a real story. I know that story. That's real.
Right? But the sugar has fucking almost 2 ounces of sugar in it. But the soda, maybe you said. But the soda has almost fucking 2 ounces of sugar in it, 12-ounce can. That's very bad sugar, blood spike, rubber toe.
Well, in fairness to aspartame, they did that with literally every chemical. Would this work as some kind of mind control thing? Like they did it with every compound you can think of. They're like, oh, would this work?
Really? Yeah. Boy,
Yes, of course.
They really
got
want a lot
list.
of mind control. Don't be a free thinker. Don't think outside the
Marijuana
box.
interfered with MK Ultra programming. Did you know that?
Right.
It broke down amnesiac barriers. So what do you think it would be illegal for so long? Now it's probably fine. You can still be controlled with it, I'm sure, by now.
Rubber toe, Mr. Dore is correct. School districts in New York City area took the snack foods out if it helped behavior. It did measurably. Snack food giants sued them and put them right back. What the fuck?
Yep.
So
That's like
it's not the
China when
wellness.
they, yeah.
Wow.
When they force them to buy opium in China, that's the same thing. You ever see little kids with too much sugar? Especially with like, if somebody's like vegan and they don't have the money to do that lifestyle, and the kids, they just give them carbs and sugar. It's like you gave them cocaine.
Yeah.
Like they're kids, they can't handle all that crap. It literally like you're drugging them. They're like cracked out.
Yeah.
That's great that they got it back in though. Good job.
Thank God. Thank God big business can manage.
That's why we need H-1B visa people.
Hey, Nathan says, you should be able to afford poisoning yourself. Oh, yes, Nathan. Check out the calluses on the back. Oh, unvaccinated guy, you almost got me on that one. Didn't happen. Okay. But the sugar, oh, I read that one. Rubber toe. If you're going to consume poison, you should be, yes, I read that one already, Nathan. Hey, Corbettle, English, American, German, they're Anglo-Saxons, that's why. Same shit, all of them. Rubber toe. Is Tulsi only going full Zionist because she secretly wants back into the Dem Party, a.k.a. doing a Liz Cheney? Oliver Pringle. Not sure, Oliver.
Oh, they own both parties. That's what we
it's the same. Yeah, it's the same people that are in control. The tech oligarch's philosophy is eugenics. Marcia. Archon is a Greek word that means ruler, savage. Look at it. Look at you dropping some info. The Three Stooges' parents were cousins. I don't know what you mean by cousins were. B-man. Hi, little girl. Have a seat. Yes, place. Good girl. Girl. No, you're good. Come here. Betsy, come here. Place. Thank you. She's so good. Those are two things that she'll sit for me and sometimes place.
And she goes in her crate.
Yeah, she'll go in her crate. L'histoire n'est qu'une fable convenue. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Misha's not helping me. But that's the story is just a conventional fable. Look at you, savage. Hey, voluntarism is where I fall politically. It's a new start from the bottom up. A lot of people are moving in that direction. Voluntarism? Sound chaser, tell me more. Actually, also, Franks, Normandy, France, that's all names of Germanic tribes. They took over Scandinavia? Okay, that's how you say it. Europe, England twice, and then they took over the New World. Rubber toe. Thank you, Rubber toe. Much appreciated. Voluntarism is a movement toward the idea that you are your own authority. Sound chaser.
What?
Yeah.
Look, the bottom line is the important thing is that you have a label that I know how to merchandise to you. So, good job.
Hey, no fried baloney. As long as they aren't hurting anyone, Satanists should be protected as freedom of religion. I think Satanists are more a joke satirizing Christianity. There's a good doc about this. No fried baloney. I think there's more to it.
What's the doc called? What's it called?
They didn't tell me. Love Angel, only pro-Trump. Voluntarism is where I fall politically. It's a new start. I read that one. Okay, moving forward.
I don't think it is satirist. I think it's like how pedos have to tell you in some way. Like they hate holding it in.
Right.
Like if you the one it's not the one weakness, but a weakness of them is if you directly ask them if they're attracted to children, they cannot say no.
Dob there says, go on, Jimmy. Ask him how money is created. It's all about money, not nationalism. We gauge each other through our common currency. Who controls money controls us. Dob there. That lady is full of shit. She's only pro-Israel because she's a Zionist. Love Angel. Meet the new Jimmy, same as the old Jimmy. Yay, rubber toe. Wait, Jimmy. Wait, wait till Jimmy's guest hears about the Overton window, savage. I
told Rick Overton not to do it, but he did it.
He did it.
I have followed Corbett since forever. He is brilliant, especially, okay. Everyone should watch The New Benders. It was a 30-minute BBC special from the 1960s. There was so much truth, and I believe it exposes how the world really works and how they control. Love Angel. And it's called The News Benders. Write it down, everybody. The News Benders.
I was on a show called Benders one time, starring Andrew Schultz on FX or something.
Oh, really?
Or Real TV or something. It was called Benders.
Benders.
Hockey league betters or something. I played the locksmith.
We penetrate the cabinets. Klaus Schwab, WEF. The feudal system worked in the 1920s as it works today through the medium of the private central bankers in each country who control the national money supply of individuals' economies. JBGT3. All right. I still have more. Jimmy, you ready for a story?
Yeah.
Back to Jimmy.
So guess what Bill Maher said? Bill Maher is